Welcome back to Dragon Army Books. My name is Dustin, and this is a love letter to a book that was first published in 1985. I probably first read it in 97, 98, around that time, I would imagine, when I was in middle school. And wasn't in love with reading yet. I liked the idea, but I didn't really like to do it because the books that were presented to us in grade school were not always the best. And then being forced to read a book was never something that I enjoyed. But randomly, maybe from the school library, I found a book that seemed intriguing and I read it. And from that moment forward, not only did I fall in love with the genre of science fiction and fantasy, but I fell in love with reading as a whole. And the reason why this YouTube channel exists and is named what it is named is because of the story that was found in this book. This is a love letter to Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I believe that I actually did my first video or one of my first videos reviewing Ender's Game. It just felt right. This is me coming back because I have read Ender's Game. I try to read it every 2 years. I don't know if that's always the case. I think the last time I read it was maybe 2018, so it's been a little bit longer. But I am reading the entire Ender's Verse. Most of those are rereads. A few of them are brand new as I'm preparing for the final link in the saga. It's The Last Shadow. It's supposed to be coming out later this year that is going to link the Ender's Game series with the Shadow series to kind of tie up the story once and for all. And so in preparation for that, I've been rereading the series and then recording my feelings and thoughts on the book / series that I read as I go through the little mini series as I go through them, so that I can just have a catalog to look back on someday and say, this is how I felt about these particular books and miniseries within the larger saga that is Ender's. And this reread reminded me why I love this book and this story so much. And let me just say, I know that as I'm going to continue these rereads in some of the future books, and even when I get to Ender's Shadow, that there's going to be a lot of love and appreciation there as well. But I don't know if any of them do it for me as well as Ender's Game. The original story here, you can tell that it is a passion project. A lot of the books that have more recently been released in this saga that take place chronologically before Ender's Game, like the first Formic Wars and the second Formic War trilogies, or whatever they are, they are not a project of love. They are a project of greed. It's like, hey, we've got these ideas, we've got this world, let's continue to play in it and let's make some money, right? But Ender's Game is a project of love where a brilliant idea came to OSC and he composed a brilliant story out of it. Now, if you don't know what Ender's Game is all about, it is set in the not too distant future, and there have been a series of invasions and battles, skirmishes, and even wars with this alien species that has been discovered, that came into Earth's atmosphere and really just disregarded all of humanity and began to terraform the planet. So here we are in the future, and now we are training up the next generation of space pilots and brilliant minds to be able to lead us into hopefully what will be a final war where we will vanquish that alien species. The buggers, they're called the Formics. They are known as the buggers. That will vanquish them once and for all. But the tactic of doing this is raising up and starting this from children. And so all across the world, there has been a limitation on how many children every family is allowed to have. They're only allowed to have 2 kids. But every once in a while, a third will be allowed, but the government has to allow that. And the third is always looked down on by society because why do you get special treatment? But that's only when the government sees it fit, sees it necessary, when there is something in the gene pool of that particular family that seems promising. Well, that is the case for young Andrew Wiggin, who is the third in his family, and he is brilliant. A mixture of his brother Peter, who is brilliant but fierce and violent, and Valentine, his sister, who is brilliant but maybe softer, a lot more meek and mild compared to Peter. And Andrew gets the mix of both of them. His nickname is Ender. His sister couldn't pronounce Andrew when he was younger, so Ender is the way that it came out, and it just kind of works for Ender's Game, right? And Ender is picked up to go into training out in space for this final war. And so the majority of the book takes place while he is at battle school and then at command school after that, playing within the battle room and befriending some of the other kids that are there. And he starts off so young at age 6, and I think he is 11 or 12 by the end of the novel. And so we've got a few years as he goes throughout there, and then as he trains up for this final battle. For my review, the thing is, you already know my feelings. I love this book. I think that both the author and the book have gotten some things wrong, and they are far from perfect. But the book, this time in particular, I noticed a few things that I really respected and enjoyed. One that I think, for good or bad, set the trajectory of what I would like in fantasy and sci-fi is that the pace here is very regimented. It's like a marching order. It continues moving forward. There is very little to no fluff in this entire story. It really goes from one scene to the next. We can jump from one year to the next because OSC is just giving us these vignettes. He's giving us these scenes that are very important to the character development of Ender Wiggin and to moving forward the narrative. Now, I think that is different from old, like classic fantasy and sci-fi literature, or at least fantasy literature, where it's very fluffy, right? With the setting and description and all of that, right? And then also there's a lot more epic fantasy stuff today, and even epic sci-fi that has a lot of fluff. And fluff isn't bad, but fluff kind of just gives, it paints in the corners, right? It fills in the imagination. But for OSC and Ender's Game, he didn't want to do that. He wanted you to be able to develop the worlds in here and just wanted to tell you a story, get from A to B to C to D, and just take you through the story without much of any kind of description about what Ender is saying, but a lot of description about what Ender is feeling internally. And so that has caused a problem within me where, like, now when I try to read other stories that have a lot of fluff, it is difficult at times because I really want fast-paced, kind of a lot of action sequences and scenes, and you don't get that as much with even modern literature, and like I said, you don't get tons of that with a lot of the classic literature. There's just something special about what happened here with Ender's Game. It was unique. It's not perfect, but it was unique. A second thing that I really enjoyed are the characters. Ender's great, and you spend a lot of time in Ender's head, but I've always thought when I first read it, I actually disliked ever leaving battle school. Of course, as a kid, I didn't want to leave battle school and go back home, Earthside, to Peter and Valentine's story. I thought it was boring as Locke and Demosthenes and would try to fast forward through that when I first read it. But now when I come back to it, it's some of my favorite scenes. I love the interactions between Ender's siblings and the brilliant minds of what they were working on at home, especially because I know the context with which how that leads the story on Earth in the future, and the government of Earth and the hegemony and all of that. So I really respect that. But at battle school, I absolutely love and have always had a fondness for Dink, Meeker, Petra, Arcanian, Bean, of course, Alai, Salam. And then when Ender hears that on this over the speaker for the first time at command school, those are some of my favorite moments. And you don't get a lot of time with any of those secondary characters. But again, the moments that you do get are very vital for character development, very vital for Ender. And I really respect what was done there, because there's a lot of affection that I, as the reader, have for some of these characters, and they didn't necessarily get much screen time, but the time that they did get was very valuable, both to the character of Ender, the protagonist, and to me as the reader. And finally, the third thing that I really noticed and reflected on and respected this time is just the story itself. Most people by now know what this story is and where it's going. I wondered this time as I read through that if I were reading it today for the first time, if I would have been able to catch on to some of the hints that were dropped and the clues that were dropped, leading us to the destination. I'm still trying not to spoil anything, right? But and I don't know. I think I might have, but it's so hard to tell, right? Because I was genuinely surprised as a kid when I first read it, and it's still something special to be able to at least watch the characters, and Ender in particular, realize that. It's cool to see how to know how OSC worked with Bean and some of the other characters in Ender's Shadow, because to see, I think it was very faithful. I don't think he had all those plans when he wrote Ender's Game, but to see like Bean really insert himself in some key moments, and even to know some of the behind the scenes of Bean working with Graf and some of the other adults to be able to set Ender up for success, is just really cool here to see it on this side. The story is remarkable, and I love everything from the game that Ender plays, the Giant's Drink. Is that what the game is? To the battle room, of course. That whole like set piece of the battle room and the skirmishes between between two different teams, and so we only get a few battles, but the battles we get are so wonderfully done. The Dragon Army against the two teams, Dragon Army where Bean has to use the tactics that he and his squad come up with. The team, or the game where Ender and his team come late, and so they have to develop a new strategy to come out of the gate in the first place. It's just all of that, and then the line of the enemy's gate is down. It is just perfect. Which contradicts what I said, that the book is not perfect, and it's not. I still think that it's probably got its own problems, and but I think OSC does a remarkable job of making kids be kids. Ish. I mean, they're brilliant kids. They are the most brilliant of the most brilliant, right? But then telling a compelling story that has one of the best conclusions, endings of all time. And I stand by that. And I don't think it's just nostalgia. I really, truly believe that Ender's Game has its position in literature and in history for a reason. Not just because it's I'm not saying all these things just because it's my favorite book of all time. It's not the best book of all time, but it deserves the place that it has attained, because it deserves that. Like, it is that quality of story with that quality of characters, and I will always have a place for it in my heart. I love Ender's Game. I always will. It is one of my favorite books of all time, and it is the book that caused me to love literature in particular science fiction and fantasy. What is your favorite character? Who is your favorite character in Ender's Game other than Ender? Let's set him aside. Other than Ender, who's your favorite? Is it Valentine? Is it Peter? Is it Graf? Is it Dink? Is it Bonzo Madrid? Or someone else? Drop that in the comments down below. I love to talk to other people who love this book and this series as much as I do. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch and like this video. If you haven't yet, click subscribe, join the Dragon Army, and we'll see you in the next one.